She scrubbed every room in that mansion. His mistress directed her. His mother watched with satisfaction. Her husband didn't even look her way. 4 hours, hands raw, knees aching, and the whole time, every wall, every floor, every room she cleaned was registered in her name. She was cleaning her own empire. There is a particular kind of silence that fills a room when a woman has decided she will not break. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. Not the silence of someone who is afraid. The kind that comes after a decision has already been made deep in the chest, somewhere below the throat, somewhere words can't reach. That was the silence Amina carried into every room of that Atlanta mansion on the night they handed her a mop and told her to clean what already belonged to her. The mansion sat on 4 acres behind iron gates in a neighborhood where the street lights never flickered. It had 12 rooms, marble floors throughout, a grand staircase that curved like something out of a painting, and a chandelier in the front hall that threw light in every direction like it was trying to prove something. Amina had lived inside those walls for 3 years. 3 years of keeping the peace, keeping her voice low, keeping herself small enough to fit inside the space they allowed her. She had never once raised her voice in that house, not once. It was a Thursday evening when everything that had been building for months finally came to a head in the living room. Amina had just come in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of glasses when Jakari's mother, Celestine, walked in from the hallway holding a mop at arm's length, the way a person holds something they consider beneath them. Celestine was a tall, composed woman who wore her authority like a second skin. She had never liked Amina. She had never pretended otherwise. She walked straight to the center of the living room where 4 members of Jakari's family sat. His brother Dion on the sofa, his sister Trice beside him scrolling her phone, 2 cousins in the chairs by the window, and she dropped that mop at Amina's feet without ceremony, without hesitation, without a single flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Since you insist on being in this house," Celestine said, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, "at least make yourself useful. Monique wants the east wing cleaned before dinner." Nobody flinched. Nobody stood up. Nobody turned to look at Jakari with the question that should have been obvious. "Are you going to say something?" Dion picked up his glass. Trice kept scrolling. The cousins looked at the floor, and Jakari, sitting in the armchair nearest the window with his phone in his hand, did not look up. He did not move. He did not say his wife's name. Amina looked at the mop on the floor. Then she looked at Jakari. He was already typing something, phone tilted away from her. She set the tray down on the side table. She picked up the mop. She did not say a word. Monique appeared at the top of the staircase maybe 10 minutes later, dressed in a silk robe the color of cream, hair loose around her shoulders, looking down at the floor below her like a woman surveying something she had already decided was hers. Monique was Jakari's mistress, though no one in that house used that word anymore. She had moved into the guest suite 6 weeks ago, and in those 6 weeks she had gradually stopped being a guest. She had started leaving her things on surfaces. She had started telling the housekeeper what she preferred for breakfast. She had started walking through rooms the way people walk through rooms they own. And now she stood at the top of that staircase and looked down at Amina the way someone looks at hired help they aren't quite satisfied with yet. "Start with the bathroom first," Monique said, adjusting her robe at the shoulder, "and use the good towels to dry the floors after. I don't like streaks." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked back into the suite and closed the door behind her. And from down below, Dion laughed softly under his breath. A small, mean laugh, the kind that isn't really about humor at all. Trice smiled at her phone like she'd just read something funny. Amina moved to the east wing. She cleaned the bathroom first, just as she had been told. She wrung the mop, worked in steady strokes, hands wrapped around the handle with a quiet kind of steadiness. She had been on her knees scrubbing the hallway tiles for almost 20 minutes when Celestine walked past on her way to the kitchen. She didn't stop walking. She reached out as she passed and nudged a glass of water off the shelf near the hallway table. It was deliberate, precise. The glass tipped slowly and water spread across the floor Amina had just cleaned, spreading in a wide, pale arc across the tile. Celestine looked down at the water. Then she looked at Amina kneeling beside it. "You missed a spot," she said. She walked away without breaking stride. The worst moment came near the end of the second hour. Amina was on her knees in the east hallway, arm extended, working at a corner where the baseboard met the floor when she heard footsteps coming toward her from the far end of the corridor. Heavy, familiar footsteps. She looked up. It was Jakari. He was walking toward the guest suite, dressed in a fresh shirt, carrying 2 glasses of something she could smell from where she was kneeling. He reached the spot in the hallway where she was working. He did not stop. He did not slow down. He stepped over her outstretched arm, the way you step over something left on the floor without thought, without acknowledgement, without the smallest hesitation, and continued walking. He knocked twice on Monique's door. It opened. He went inside. The door closed. Amina stayed where she was for a moment. She did not cry. She did not call after him. She looked at the door at the end of the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the baseboard and kept cleaning. It was in the last room, the small sitting room off the east corridor, that her phone buzzed against her hip inside her apron pocket. She didn't answer it while she was working. When she finally stepped out into the quiet back hallway to rest her knees for a moment, she pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Amina, my name is Mr. Harlan. I'm the estate attorney for your father, Cornelius. Please contact us at your earliest convenience regarding a matter of significant urgency." She read it. Twice, she silenced the phone. She put it back in her pocket and she went back to cleaning. 4 hours total, hands raw where the skin had dried out from the cleaning solution, knees aching from the marble. She wrung the mop one last time, leaned it against the wall in the utility closet, removed her gloves and walked to the small back bedroom they had moved her into 3 weeks ago. When Monique took over the master suite, she sat on the edge of the small bed. She looked at the ceiling. She was still. Wearing the gold pendant around her neck, a small pendant shaped like a key that had rested against her chest every single day for the past 15 years. She reached up and held it between 2 fingers. Her face was still. Her eyes were dry. This was the face of a woman who had already somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd hour decided everything. To understand what Amina was made of, you had to go back to Charlotte. You had to go back to a modest house on a clean street, where a tall, unhurried man named Cornelius raised his only daughter with the kind of patience that comes from understanding exactly how long good things take. Cornelius was not the kind of man who spoke often. When he did, the words were precise, considered, chosen the way a builder chooses which piece goes where. He had built his first property with cash, saved over 11 years of working before sunup and after sundown. He never borrowed what he couldn't cover. He never built what he couldn't sustain. He taught Amina to read contracts before she was 10, not because he expected her to follow him into real estate, but because he believed every woman should know exactly what she was standing on. He had one saying he returned to more than any other. He'd say it at the breakfast table, or driving her to school, or sitting on the back porch in the evening with the kind of quiet comfort between 2 people who don't need to fill every silence. Never let a room full of noise convince you that you have nothing to say. He said it the way people repeat the truest things, not to teach, but to remind. She heard it so many times it became something she carried inside her below thought the way people carry their names. The morning she left for college, he stood at the door in his good shirt and held out a small jewelry box. Inside it was the pendant, gold, shaped like a key, thin and clean, and just heavy enough to feel real against the skin. He put it around her neck himself, fingers steady, and then he stepped back and looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "This is not jewelry, Amina. This is a reminder. Every door you ever need, you already hold the key." She had worn it every day since. Through college, through the years building her career in nonprofit development, through the fundraiser where she met Jakari, through the wedding, through 3 years of a marriage that had steadily become something she didn't recognize. The pendant had never left her neck, not once. Cornelius had never told her the full scale of what he was building. She knew he owned properties. She knew he was respected in real estate circles in several cities, but he spoke of his work the way wealthy people speak of money. Not at all. He lived the same way he always had. Same house, same car, same porch in the evenings. He gave generously to the church and to 3 community organizations, and he never made a production of it. Amina grew up understanding that real wealth didn't perform. It just was. When she brought Jacare to Charlotte to meet her father for the first time, Cornelius was polite. He shook Jacare's hand. He asked him questions. He listened to his answers with that same unhurried patience. But later, when Jacare had gone to bed and it was just the two of them on the porch, Cornelius said nothing about whether he approved or disapproved. He just sat for a while and then he said, "You're a gentle woman, baby girl. Make sure whoever stands beside you knows what that's worth." She took it as a blessing. It wasn't. It was a warning. She understood that only much later. The week after the wedding, while Amina and Jacare were still on their honeymoon, Cornelius drove to his attorney's office and sat down across from Mr. Harland and updated his will. He transferred the deed to the Atlanta mansion into Amina's name as a protective gift. He restructured the inheritance documents so that, in the event of his passing, every asset, all 43 commercial properties, all 11 residential complexes, all development rights in 6 states would go directly and solely to his daughter. No exceptions, no conditions, no waiting period. He told Mr. Harland simply, "She may not need it right away, but she'll know what to do with it when the time comes." He signed every page in his neat, deliberate hand. Then he drove home and sat on his porch and said nothing about it to anyone. The betrayal had not arrived all at once. It had come in layers, the way erosion works. Slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you look and find the ground has changed beneath your feet. Celestine had been working on Jacare for the better part of a year. She was surgical about it. She didn't come at Amina loudly. She came at her in private moments with Jacare, over phone calls that lasted too long, over dinners where she and Jacare sat close, and Amina was always somehow across the room. She told Jacare that Amina was cold, that she was secretive, that a woman who spoke as little as Amina did was hiding something, or had decided she was too good for the family she had married into. She planted these ideas the way someone plants weeds, without drawing attention to the planting, just waiting for them to grow. Jacare had never been a man of strong convictions. He was charming, expressive, good at the surface of things. He had loved Amina, or had something like love for her in the beginning, that bright early feeling that gets mistaken for depth, but he had never developed the patience to understand her. Her quietness unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. He had started listening to his mother the way a man listens when doubt has already done most of the work. He heard her out. He began to nod. Monique had come into the picture through a colleague and had stayed through calculation. She was not unintelligent. She studied what Jacare needed to hear, and she provided it with precision. She told him that Amina's gentleness was passivity, that her stillness was indifference, that her refusal to argue back was not dignity. It was contempt dressed up as patience. She told him that a woman who loved her husband would fight for him, would make noise, would make her presence felt. She made Jacare feel like staying with Amina was a quiet kind of settling, and she made herself feel like the corrective. Jacare believed her with the particular conviction of a man who needed to believe he was making an upgrade. Dion had begun talking about removing Amina from the house, not loudly in the way of a man who has already made a decision and is arranging the details. He said to Celestine that they should move quickly. Before Amina got comfortable, Celestine agreed. Trice said nothing, which meant she agreed too. None of them had ever asked a single question about Amina's family, not once in 3 years, not where she came from, not what her father did, not what she had before she walked into their lives. They had decided what she was the moment they met her, and they had never needed to revise the picture. The dinner table scene happened on a Wednesday. Jacare sat at the head of the table and waited until everyone was eating before he spoke. He said in the casual voice of a man announcing something he had already decided, that Monique would be moving into the master bedroom going forward, that Amina would take the smaller room near the utility area in the east wing. He said it without meeting Amina's eyes. He said it the way someone reads a decision already made, already settled, already done. The table received it with the silence of a room that had already been prepared. Celestine took a slow sip of wine. Dion gave a small nod. Trice looked at her plate. Amina set down her fork. She looked at Jacare across the length of the table. He was already looking away. She sat very still for a moment, the pendant cool against her chest. Then she picked up her plate. She walked to the kitchen. She set the plate down gently in the sink. She stood at the window over the sink and looked at the dark backyard, the iron fence along the edge of the property, the lights of the city beyond it. She let out one slow breath, and behind the closed kitchen door, alone for the first time in hours, she allowed herself one single tear, not more. One. After that night, something shifted in Amina in a way the family mistook for surrender. She stopped engaging with the room. She stopped rising to the small provocations, the cut looks, the pointed comments at meals. She moved through the house with a quietness that was different from her usual quiet, more internal, more sealed. She was not absent. She was somewhere else in her mind, somewhere they couldn't follow her. They saw what they wanted to see. They saw a woman giving up. The second call from Mr. Harlan came 4 days after the dinner table announcement. This time Amina answered. She was in the utility room, door pulled shut, voice barely above a murmur. Mr. Harlan's voice was measured, careful, clearly practiced in delivering significant information to people in difficult moments. He told her that her father Cornelius had passed away 6 days ago quietly at home in the evening. He told her that as the sole heir of the Cornelius estate, she was entitled to 43 commercial properties, 11 residential complexes, development rights across 6 states, multiple financial accounts, and he paused here in a way that had weight the Atlanta residential property on which she was currently residing. Total appraised value of the full estate, $28 billion. He said it simply, the way figures that large have to be said because anything else makes them sound unreal. Amina sat down on the utility room floor. She was holding the pendant in her palm. She did not cry for her father in that moment. That grief was already inside her from the first call she hadn't answered, already working through her quietly. She sat and she breathed and she thought about his voice. She thought about the porch in Charlotte, the evening light, the way he sat without needing to say much. She thought about what he had said to her the morning she left. Every door you ever need, you already hold the key. She closed her fingers around the pendant. She put it back against her chest, and when she finally spoke into the phone, her voice was steady and clear, and she said only, "Give me 2 weeks." That night she lay in the small bed in the back room and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The house was loud with the sounds of Monique and Jacari, and the family settling into their version of an evening. She lay perfectly still and she thought with the kind of calm that comes when a person has decided to stop fighting the current and has started moving with their own intention instead. She didn't plan revenge. She planned clarity, and clarity in the hands of a woman with patience is the most dangerous thing in the world. Jacari had always loved a gathering. He enjoyed the feeling of a full room, the movement of people through well-lit spaces, the sense of being at the center of something significant. So when he announced a gathering at the mansion, business contacts, family, friends, neighbors, a kind of loosely defined celebration of what he was calling his new chapter. The house went into preparation mode with a cheerfulness nobody questioned. Monique oversaw the arrangements with the authority of a woman who had decided the role was already hers. Celestine approved the menu. Dion and Trice spread the word. The invitations went out for a Saturday evening. Amina made no preparations. She said nothing about attending. In the 2 weeks since she had spoken to Mr. Harlan, she had moved through the house in the same sealed quietness, and nobody had noticed anything different because they had already stopped looking at her carefully. She had spent those 2 weeks on the phone with Mr. Harlan and his associates, reviewing documents, signing where she needed to sign, understanding fully what her father had built and what it meant that it was now hers. She had not yet told anyone. She had honored the 2 weeks she asked for, spending it in preparation the way her father had always prepared, quietly, completely, without announcing the work. Saturday evening came. The mansion filled. The chandelier in the front hall did what it always did, threw light in every direction with a kind of excess that felt celebratory. Jacari was in the center of the room with Monique on his arm, dressed in a red dress, playing her role with confidence. Celestine moved through the guests with the bearing of a woman presiding over something she had built. Dion laughed too loud near the bar. Trice accepted compliments on her dress near the window. Amina arrived 20 minutes after the gathering had started. She came through the front door without announcement, without fanfare, without the kind of entrance that calls attention to itself. She wore a structured ivory dress. Her hair was natural, pulled back from her face with a simplicity that took confidence to wear, in a room dressed the way that room was dressed. The pendant rested against her collarbone where it always did. She walked in the way a person walks when they are not performing walking, just moving through space they are comfortable in, at a pace that doesn't ask for permission. The room noticed, not all at once, but in a wave. First the people nearest the door, then outward until there were people lowering their glasses and turning to look. Something in the quality of her stillness, the way she moved without urgency or apology, made the room recalibrate without quite knowing why. Jacari saw her from across the room. His expression moved through surprise and then tightened into something between irritation and unease. Celestine's chin lifted. Monique's eyes fixed on Amina with an alertness that she tried to make look like indifference and didn't quite achieve. Mr. Harlan came through the front door 30 seconds behind Amina. He was a trim, silver-haired man in a dark suit, carrying a slim leather folder, accompanied by 2 associates who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who did this kind of work regularly. He crossed the room without acknowledging the gathered guests and came to stand few steps behind Amina's right shoulder. Monique moved first. She crossed the room toward Amina with the confidence of a woman who had decided weeks ago that Amina had no standing in this house, and she stopped at a distance close enough to make the exchange public. "Nobody invited you here dressed like that," she said. She meant it as a dismissal. She said it expecting a flinch. Amina looked at her, not with anger, not with the look of someone preparing a cutting remark, with a steadiness that was somehow more disorienting than either. "I don't need an invitation to my own property," she said. Jacari crossed the room. His voice had the edge of someone performing composure for an audience. "Amina, what are you doing? This isn't the time for..." Mr. Harlan opened the leather folder. He walked to the center table in the ballroom and laid the documents out in a clean row, notarized, stamped, clear. He spoke in the tone of a man who had done this before and knew that precision was a form of kindness. Because anything imprecise gave room for argument, and argument was a way of postponing what was true. The Atlanta residential property, all 47,000 square ft, all outbuildings, all adjoining land, has been registered in the name of Amina since the date of her marriage to Mr. Jacari. This was executed as a protective transfer by her father, Cornelius, 1 week following the wedding ceremony. The full estate inheritance comprising 43 commercial properties, 11 residential complexes, development rights in 6 states, and associated financial accounts. Total appraised value $28 billion was formally released into Miss Amina's possession 6 days ago upon the settlement of her father's estate. The room did not make a sound. Celestine's wine glass stopped halfway between the table and her mouth. Don looked at the floor with the look of a man recalculating everything quickly and finding the numbers don't balance. Trice had backed up 2 steps without appearing to notice she was doing it. Monique looked at Jacari with the sudden sharpness of someone who has just realized they have been playing a game on a board that was never what they thought it was. Jacari looked at Amina. He was looking at her the way people look when a familiar face has suddenly become someone they have never seen before. Amina did not raise her voice. She did not smile with satisfaction. She let the room sit in its own silence for a moment, the way her father had taught her to let silence do its work. Then she looked at Jacari directly and said simply and clearly without heat, "You handed me a mop in my own house. I used it. Now I'm asking you to leave it." She picked up the deed from the table. She held it once, just held it, her father's careful signature on the first page, and she set it back down. She looked at no one else. She turned and walked toward the front hall, the pendant catching the light from the chandelier as she passed beneath it, and she walked out the front door. Jacari discovered the extent of what he didn't have with the particular brutality of a man who had never thought to ask. Not the house, not the accounts, not a single asset he had assumed was shared or communal or built together. His name was on his car and the clothing in his closet and very little else. He had spent 3 years living in a building he never owned on a foundation someone else had built, spending money that had moved through him without sticking. The business contacts who had been at the gathering that Saturday evening began to pull back within days. Calls went slower to return. Meetings got rescheduled and not rescheduled again. The story had moved through certain circles with the speed of a story that is both too good and too real to stay quiet. Monique was gone within a week. No conversation, no explanation. Jacari came back to the guest suite late on a Thursday evening, and the closet was empty, and the surface of the vanity table was bare where her things had been. She had removed herself from the situation with the same efficiency she had entered it. And she did not call. She surfaced once on social media about 2 weeks later, posting in a way that tried to position herself as unbothered, and the comments came for her so thoroughly and so fast that she took the post down within 48 hours and went quiet after that. Celestine received formal correspondence from Mr. Harlan's office, informing her that the property she had been using for family gatherings and treating as an extension of her own household was registered solely in Amina's name, and that all guests were expected to vacate within the stated time frame. She called Jacari furious, the kind of fury that comes from someone who has been wronged so completely that the anger has nowhere to go except outward. Jacari had no answer for her. He had run out of answers. He was learning in the slow and punishing way that some people learn that the foundation of everything he had taken for granted had never been his. Dion's plans, which had been built on certain assumptions about what the family controlled and what could be leveraged against it, came apart when the assumptions did. He had made quiet arrangements based on a version of reality that no longer existed. Trice stopped answering certain calls and changed her behavior in rooms in a way that people noticed, even if they didn't say so. The family had operated as a unit for a long time, and units built on someone else's resources have a particular way of fracturing when that resource is removed. Jacari came to the gate on a Tuesday afternoon about 3 weeks after the gathering. He came alone, no car that Amina's security team recognized. He stood at the gate for a while looking at the driveway that curved toward the front door of the house, the iron fence, the grounds that were exactly as they had always been, except that the context of everything had changed. He asked the guard to let Amina know he was there. The guard made a call, and then he came back and told Jacari that Miss Amina was unavailable. Jacari stood at the gate for a while longer. The guard watched him from a distance with the patient neutrality of a man doing his job. Eventually, Jacari turned and walked away down the street, and the gate remained closed behind him. 6 months later, Amina was back in Charlotte, not in transition, not recovering in the way the word usually means, fragile, tender, still oriented toward the wound. She was simply back in the place where she had been built. The way some people return to their foundations, not because they are broken, but because foundations are. Where you come from and coming home is its own kind of statement. She sat on the porch of her father's house in the early morning with a cup of coffee, watching the light come up over the familiar roof line across the street. The city was beginning its quiet before the noise. Birds, a car turning slowly somewhere, the sound of a door opening and closing down the block. She managed the estate from here now, at least for this season. Mr. Harlan's team handled the operational weight of things, but she was engaged with the work in a way she hadn't expected to find satisfying and did. Her father's properties were good properties, well chosen, well maintained, built with the same patience with which he had built everything. She was learning the language of what he had made, and in learning it, she was learning in new ways who he had been. There was grief in that. A particular kind of grief that comes not from loss alone, but from understanding arriving after the person who gave you something can no longer hear you say thank you. She had not rebuilt loudly. She had not given interviews. She had not posted anything about what had happened in that house, and she would not. That was not the kind of woman she was, and the events of those months had not changed what kind of woman she was. They had only confirmed it. Some people go through fire and come out performing their survival for anyone who will watch. Amina had gone through something and come out quieter, cleaner, more precisely herself. On the small table, beside her porch chair, sat a wooden box she had found in her father's study when she was clearing his things. Inside it were two items. The first was the pendant which she had removed from around her neck for the first time in 15 years and placed there carefully, not because she no longer needed the reminder, but because she had come to understand she no longer needed the reminder in the same way. The second was a letter written in her father's handwriting on a piece of his personal stationery, dated the week after her wedding and never sent. She had read it many times now. She knew it by heart. He had written simply, "You will know when it's time, baby girl, you always have. I just made sure the door stayed open." She held the letter for a moment, then she folded it along its original creases and placed it back in the box beside the pendant. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the street. Her father's chair sat empty beside her as it would always sit from now on. And she was making peace with its emptiness the way person makes peace with the things that are permanent, not by filling the space, but by learning to be at rest with it. Some women are not quiet because they are afraid. They are quiet because they are measuring, because they were raised in a tradition of patience that understands something about how power actually works. Not loud, not performed, not dependent on the recognition of people who don't yet see clearly. Amina had been underestimated by the people closest to her because they had looked at her gentleness and called it weakness, looked at her restraint and called it passivity, looked at her silence and decided it meant she had nothing to say. They had been wrong about every single thing. She had not won because she fought back. She had not won because she was loud or because she performed her pain in a way that demanded acknowledgement or because she had planned something dramatic and watched it unfold. She had won because she never became what they tried to make her. She had stayed herself. Soft where she was soft, patient where she was patient. And when the moment came, clear in the way that people are clear when they have always known exactly who they are. Her father had known. He had seen it before she did, and he had done what good fathers do. He had made sure the door stayed open, and then he had trusted her to walk through it in her own time. That was the story of Amina, not a story about revenge, not a story about what she got or what they lost. A story about a woman who stayed true to something quietly and came out the other side of a terrible season with her character still intact. A story about the kind of strength that doesn't need a room full of people watching to be real. A story about a father who loved his daughter in the most practical and protective way available to him. A story about what happens when the wrong people underestimate the right woman. She sat on the porch until the sun was fully up and the street was alive, and her coffee had gone cool in her hands, and she sat there a little longer because there was nowhere she needed to be and everything she needed was already here. If Amina's story moved something in you, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a key in the comments if you believe patience is its own kind of power. And if you're new here, welcome. We tell stories about real strength. Subscribe and stay close.